Thanks for coming out, everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Andrew Baggarly. He's a beat writer for the San Jose Mercury News. He's been on the beat for about 14 years now. He was covering the Angels and Dodgers before, but we can forget about that part. He's been doing the Giants since 2004. He writes an awesome blog called Extra Bags, and you can follow him on Twitter, too. So without further ado, Mr. Bags.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that introduction. It's great to be here. A real honor to be here among so many bright people. And before I go any further, I want to introduce my partner, Aaliyah, who's here today. And please join me in congratulating Stanford University's newest sociology professor. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of Giants regalia around the room. I know a lot of you are Giants fans, and I want to know how many of you predicted the World Series, the 2010 championship. At least somebody in this room is going to claim that they predict. Anybody? Show of hands. Anybody? Nobody. Well, guess what? If you did predict, I wouldn't have given you credit for it because you would have predicted a team that had Benji Molina behind the plate, an outfield of Mark DeRosa, John Bowker, and Aaron Rowan, Todd Wellmeyer's number 5 starter, and nobody knew who Andres Torres was at that point. That team didn't win the World Series. As you know, the team that did win had Pat Burrell and Cody Ross. Buster Posey came up in midseason, Madison Bumgarner, of course, and that team sort of picked along the parts as they rolled along and won the World Series, and that was a much different team than began the season. And that's what made this book so much fun to write, was not only did they win a World Series for the first time in 53 years, and that was enough to brand them legends in San Francisco, but also the way they did it, sort of just accepting everyone as they were and picking up parts as they rolled along and sort of just anybody who joined the team was part of the family, and they became greater than the sum of their parts, which is what every team hopes to be, and that's certainly what they were. So, as Ryan mentioned, I've been on the Giants beat for this is my eighth season. The Giants are off today, so as am I, and I've been working for the San Jose Mercury News for since 2006. I worked at the Oakland Tribune before that, and before that I covered the Angels for a few years and the Dodgers for a few years before that. And as you know, the newspaper business is an up and down business right now. The optimists would say it's challenging. The pessimists would say it's a death spiral. I prefer to go with challenging. But there's no substitute for being there and being around the team every day. And that's something that only happens because the folks at the San Jose Mercury, my editors, have gone to bat to make sure that when they do make cuts in the budget, when they do lose people, that they still prioritize not only having someone to staff the beat, but all the expenses of going on the road and being there for 6 weeks of spring training in Scottsdale, Arizona, and then all the road games during the season. It adds up to quite a bit of an expense, and they make sure they keep the commitment to having me there on the beat. And that's what allows you to write with any kind of context, with any kind of perspective, is just to be there every day and to form relationships with the players so that they can trust you and be able to tell you their stories, and then I'm able to pass them along to the readers. So I owe quite a bit to them for making that commitment and keeping with that commitment. I will say that I am very fortunate that the Giants did not win the World Series in my first year covering the beat, because I don't think I would have fully been able to appreciate what it meant to people, what it meant to the history of the Bay Area, baseball in the Bay Area, all the traditions of the franchise, because it would have been my first year on the beat. But having covered the team for 6 years before that, having covered them through the Barry Bonds era, and seeing all the changes as they happened, and really getting to know so many fans and the season ticket holders who sit right in front of me in the press box, and being able to engage them really let me know just what it meant for the Giants to win the World Series. Obviously, it meant quite a bit. I will say that I think the way I've gone about covering the beat and covering the team comes from my personal experience growing up as a Chicago Cubs fan. I see the Cubs hat in the front row. God bless you. Maybe one day there will be a Cubs Band of Misfits book. But my older brothers were born and raised in Illinois, as was I. We moved to California when I was very young, so I don't really remember growing up there, but it was branded into me to be a Cubs fan. So that's the cross I had to bear, being a Cubs fan growing up in Los Angeles. But I always wanted to know about what was going on with the team, and really not only the balls and strikes and the X's and O's, but also just what the players were all about and how they got along and what they did and the pranks they pulled and all that good stuff, and really shows you a lot about their personalities and all the traditions of the organization and welcoming back old heroes and all the context that goes with the games, because there's a game every day. There's always something new on the field, but it's all that extra stuff that I loved as a fan and I wanted to really bring to my coverage. And so I've been very fortunate. I've grown to know this team and this franchise, this organization, in the Bay Area well enough to be able to do that, hopefully. And, I skipped a lot of classes when I was an undergrad at Northwestern University. I took the L train and went to a lot of Cubs games, sat in the bleachers. I'm going to sound old, but the bleacher tickets were only $6 back then. It was optimism every year. And every year you hope that maybe this is the year they'll do it. Maybe this is the group of guys, even though they're predicted to finish 20 games under 500. Everybody starts fresh every year, and you hope that maybe the magic will happen. And I got to imagine that Giants fans felt the same way, even though last year's team wasn't really expected to do much of anything, maybe contend for a division, but not have the kind of lineup that could win a World Series. They didn't strike fear in anybody, and certainly they were able to do it, and they were able to realize those hopes. And so not all optimism is false optimism. So whether it's pathos or ethos, I never remember which is which, but I kind of got it, and what it was like to be a Giants fan growing up as a Cubs fan. And when you look at the history of the Giants organization, it was a history of sluggers, of offense, of Willie Mays and Willie Mccovey and Orlando Cepeda, and you had a great pitcher come along every once in a while, like a Juan Marichal, but a Barry Bonds was the greatest offensive force really the game has ever seen, and the Giants were not able to win a World Series with any of them. And so, whatever group of players would accomplish this would go down as legends, and for it to be a team like this as opposed to a slugging or a hulking team or a team that was fueled by steroid controversy or whatever, made it even more pure, and I think made it even a better group to embrace. One thing that I'd like to talk about a little bit is just team chemistry, and it's something that really applies to any work situation or any family situation. It's how do you get productivity out of people? How do you get the most out of people? And does winning breed chemistry, or does chemistry breed winning? And I've heard that argument so many times, or people talk about it so many times, which is which, or what needs to happen first. And I think, if anything, what this year's team taught me is that when you start to hear people say things like, I want to win for the guy next to me more than I want to win for myself, it's something that you can't really force. It has to happen organically. And there were so many years when Barry Bonds was with the Giants, and they would do little pranks or singing competitions to try to engender some team chemistry. But it would work, and people would laugh and smile, and at the end of the day, they pretty much went back to being who they were, which was 24 guys and one guy in the corner of the room. So, that's pretty much the way it went. So. It's not to say that the Giants couldn't have won a World Series with Barry Bonds. They got within, 6 outs of winning a World Series with Barry Bonds in 2002. Bad memories. But I think it took something special. It almost took, these guys, they knew that no one expected them to win. And if they had a tough loss, which they had a lot of tough losses, they had a 15-inning game at Coors Field with extra innings that they lost. They had a game against Cincinnati where they came back from 10 runs down, biggest comeback in Giants history, and they ended up losing that game 11-10, and they came back and they would win the next day. So it was something special in that group. They had some kind of chemistry where they almost didn't care what anybody thought about them. They were just going to go out and try to win for each other every day and wipe the slate clean. And when you've got to win 11 games over 3 postseason series, you're going to have tough losses mixed in there. And that's when the playoffs started. I thought, maybe this team might have something here. They might be able to do it. And I think that one thing that was neat about me with the book to do was in my newspaper reporting, there's always a new newspaper the next day. No matter how good or how bad your story was, there's always blank pages to fill. And they come at you every single day. You never get a day off. from having a newspaper. It comes out every day. So even if there's a huge earthquake, they'll probably find a way to print a newspaper. So no matter, there are some stories that are really stories that I've been proud of, or more proud than others, and they're here one day and gone the next. And it was one nice way for me to be able to take my reporting not only from 2010, but from previous years as well, whether it be Tim Lincecum and when he first came into the league, and all the things in his backstory, going back to when he was a kid and his dad teaching him his unique mechanics, and seeing him through his Cy Young seasons, and how he wasn't ready to be the kind of pitcher that he needed to be to win a World Series. In fact, if you recall, he had a terrible August where he was 0-5 and really was struggling. He was having a crisis of confidence. And it took him being sort of yelled at by the general manager to realize that, just winning 2 Cy Young Awards isn't enough. He needs to be there to win for his teammates. And if he only gets one run of support, then he's got to win 1-0. And he walked out of that meeting and he said, I get it now. It's about more than myself. And then you saw what he did in September and beyond. He turned into that guy who could match up against a Roy Halladay or a Cliff Lee, where he didn't look anywhere capable of being that pitcher just a month earlier. And you go into his sort of personal growth, and he did a lot of growing last year, and now he looks better than ever after an off-season spent working out. I mean, he just threw a shutout the other day and was throwing 96 miles an hour in the 9th inning, and we would not have seen that a year ago. So the stories are even continuing. But, you go into Lincecum, and there were other stories from the past where maybe he wasn't that kind of that player, that kind of teammate. And one neat story that kind of disappeared the day after I wrote it, that I was able to put in the book, was from his rookie year. And he had overslept. He's a little bit of a slacker. He overslept for a flight, and he didn't make the bus that left the ballpark. And to miss a team flight is very rare. It never happens. Even though these guys are ball players, you think they slack off sometimes, but you never miss a team flight, especially if you're a rookie, which Lincecum was in 2007. So he had to buy his own plane fare to Cincinnati, and he got in about 3 or 4 hours after the team. Team didn't play that day. They were starting the series the next day, so no real harm done. But the next day, Barry Bonds, who was still a Giant at that time, called a meeting, and he had everybody in the clubhouse, in the room, and he yelled at Timmy, chewed him out, and took the itinerary and stuck it up against his chest and says, this thing isn't leaving your sight the rest of the trip. And so Lincecum, as you'd imagine, probably needed some new pants right around then. But then the trip went on to St. Louis after Cincinnati, and they made Timmy carry all the players' luggage up to their room and gave him one little brass cart for about a traveling party of 45 or 50, and he was delivering bags until 3 in the morning. And he's never missed a team flight since. So that was just a story that was fun to write. It told you a lot about him, about where he had to come from to where he had to get to, and it was a story I was able to include in the book. So there's a lot more reporting in there than just 2010. There's a lot of stuff that precedes it. And probably the furthest back that I can go in my career as a reporter that had stuff that was applicable to this book was when I covered the Angels in 2000 to 2001. And Benji Molina was a rookie catcher the year that I was a rookie beat writer. And Benji is a big-hearted guy. He's got a pretty amazing story to tell. He basically wasn't drafted. He went back to Puerto Rico, and he decided that he was going to quit baseball. No one gave him a chance. So he played in a couple of semi-pro games, and then he took his spikes and he knotted the laces together, and he threw them up into the power lines, and that was his symbolic act that I'm done with baseball. I'm throwing my cleats to the trade winds here. And then he was going to ask his dad if he had a lead on a job at the Westinghouse factory that his dad worked at for 12 hours a day. And it so happened that very week, a scout from the Angels had come to see Benji's brother. If you know the Molina family, they're 3 catchers, all brothers. They all have World Series rings. So Benji's the oldest. Jose was the next, and the scout, his name was Ray Pointement. He came to see Jose, and he had happened to go across the street and saw Benji hit a ball to right field in that last semi-pro game, and he thought, I like that swing. And then he saw Benji run, and he thought, I don't like that. I don't like that trot. You know, Benji, he's probably the slowest person who's ever played Major League Baseball. So, but he thought, you know what? If he could catch, maybe he could be a serviceable player. So he's working out Jose one day, and he said, "Hey, is your brother here?" And Jose runs back to get Benji, and he says, "Quick, grab everything. Grab your glove. Grab your shoes. My shoes. They're up in the power lines. What do I do?" So he borrowed somebody else's shoes, I guess, and he made a couple throws. He'd never caught, if you believe it. Benji was a shortstop and an outfielder in junior college. Yeah, it probably wasn't too pretty either. But he signed for $500, and $500 is what it took to get his big league career started. And he said, I would have signed for nothing. So then he went to the Angels system, and he was told, you can't start games. You're basically here to catch in the bullpen. And so he didn't have a lot of time to develop as a catcher. So then he went to winter ball, where the same thing happened. They basically used him to catch bullpens. But he knew if he was going to be a pro baseball player, he had to learn how to catch. And the only team he could play for was on the other side of the island. And he was driving in you could read about it in the book, but basically he had a car that was not road safe that he was driving in to get to the ball field every day. Tires screeched every time he made a right turn. The tires were too big for the car. It's a miracle that he was able to get back and forth without crashing that car. But he was able to catch every day, and he got better and better, and he eventually became a big league catcher. And those are stories he told me 10 years ago when I was covering the Angels, and they were able to have some new life in the book. And for me, it was very easy to start the book where I did, in Chapter 1, because if you know what happened with the Giants last year, Benji was traded in the very end of June to clear the catching spot for Buster Posey. And Benji found out about it when they were on a flight that was descending into Denver to start a road trip against the Rockies. And the reason he found out about it is the Texas Rangers were currently in bankruptcy. Major League Baseball needed to clear the finances on the deal, so some of the details leaked out before the trade became official. And players were walking up to him and saying, hey, good luck, sorry to hear it. And so Benji was really caught off guard by this. And he stood on the team bus that day and basically said, you guys are a special group of players, and you're going to do something awesome this year, and you've got my phone number, call me anytime. And not only was he right, but he would end up catching for the Texas Rangers, playing against them in the World Series. So that, to me, was probably the most improbable, pretty neat moment of the entire year when you look at all the ways, if you believe in fate or whatever. And so I thought, I've got to start there. And then from there, it was very easy to roll on into Chapter 2 and write about Buster Posey and what happened with the Giants farm system and how he was sort of wearing a halo for everybody in rebuilding this farm system. And he was able to do things that no rookie catcher is really supposed to do, and keeping his poise throughout all the postseason. So from there, it was fun to roll through the whole year, but also do backflashes into some of these guys' background, whether it be Juan Uribe or Madison Bumgarner or Pat Burrell or Aubrey Huff. And I never thought one of my biggest journalistic scoops would be writing about the rally thong first, but so be it. I'll tell you a quick story about that, actually. The company that makes the rally thong, if you didn't know, Aubrey Huff, with 30 games left to go in the season, started wearing this red man's thong underwear. Apparently, he and his wife were going through Macy's one day. She said, why don't you get that for me and wear it one night? And he said, okay. I don't know why you want that, but sure. So he decided to show up to the ballpark as they're still trailing the San Diego Padres. And he said, 30 games left, and this thing's got 20 wins in it. And wouldn't you know, they won and clinched the division the last game of the regular season, and they went exactly 20-10. So the rally thong did its job. He would walk around pretty much with the rally thong on and nothing else, which, if you're in the clubhouse, you just have to try to avert your eyes, basically. He's proud of his body, so hey, good for him. But anyway, so that was the story behind the rally thong, and the company that makes the thong found out about what Huff was doing and generating a little publicity. So unsolicited, they sent like 3 giant dress-sized boxes filled with thong underwear. And the day that they arrived, I think it was during the division series, might have been during the NLCS, Huff was distributing them to everybody. He was like Santa Claus. He threw one at Bruce Bochy, and Bochy's like, oh, I don't think that's a good idea. So So anyway, I'm talking to him about this, and we had our Mean Joe Green moment. You know, the old Coke commercial where he throws the jersey to the kid. He threw me a thong, and he says, "There you go. There's one for you too." So I have one in a drawer that will never, ever be worn. So, it was just such a group of characters, and that's kind of what it took. It took them being a little rambunctious and not really caring, what the outside perceptions were. There are a lot of moments in the book that were, I think, a little more poignant. There's some funny moments, and one of the moments that I think was one of the most moving last year was Willie Mccovey. And if anybody knows Willie Mccovey's story, I think that he sums up what it means to be a Giant, or a San Francisco Giant story, more than anybody, even better than Willie Mays. Because Willie Mays almost was so great that he was a little bit unapproachable. And Mccovey always had to play second fiddle to Mays. He was from Mobile, Alabama, and Hank Aaron was from Mobile, Alabama, so he's not the most famous person from where he's from. But he was the guy who got the respect of pitchers more than anybody else. Until Barry Bonds came along, he held records for intentional walks, and no one ever wanted to pitch him or face him because he was such a fearsome hitter. And in 1962, just a handful of years after the Giants moved from New York in 1958, they were meeting the Yankees in the World Series, and they had a team full of Hall of Famers, and they were in Game 7. And Willie Mays had doubled to put the winning runs on base in a 1-0 game. And here came Mccovey, and Bill Terry threw the pitch, and Mccovey hit it hard. He had a line drive, but it was right at the second baseman, Bobby Richardson. And that was it. If it was 3 feet higher, then the Giants would have won the World Series. As it turned out, the Yankees won the World Series. I mean, one at bat was win or loss right there. And it was one of the greatest endings in World Series history, but it's not the one that you really hear about because it would have been a great ending if he'd gotten the hit. To have the guy catch the ball almost was, that's not the Bill Mazeroski or Joe Carter. People remember walk-off hits. They don't remember walk-off catches so much. But they were so close. The Giants were so close with Mccovey. And then in later years, he had a lot of health problems. He still battles with a lot of knee and back problems. And last July, I kind of noticed he wasn't at the ballpark, Mccovey. He'd always shown up and was always in his suite, and I hadn't seen him for several weeks. And I asked Mike Murphy, the longtime trainer, and it turned out that he had a back surgery that was so extensive it lasted 8 hours, and I think that they fused about 6 or 8 vertebrae. I mean, it was very extensive. And he made his goal, Mccovey, to get through his rehab and to come back to the ballpark for that final home series, where they were going to give out the Willie Mack Award, and that's the award they give the most inspirational Giant as voted by the players. Benji Molina won it twice during his time. And that was his goal during his rehab every day, was to get back and present that award. And so, here's a guy who had inspired the players for years, and now the players were inspiring him. And he made it back, and he did make it on the field. And for anybody who watched him walk out there in his crutches and knew what he had to do to be there, it was a very moving moment. And he gave the award to Andres Torres, who was a very fitting recipient, given all that he'd overcome in his minor league career. And to see the Giants get their rings this year, to see Mccovey get his ring finally was pretty cool. That was pretty neat. So I stopped being a journalist there for a moment and just really appreciated what I was seeing. But that's why I wanted to title that chapter where they're closing in on the division, Home Stretch, because Willie Mccovey's his nickname was Stretch because he was so tall and stretched at first base to catch throws. And so it was the home stretch, but it's 2 words, home stretch. And so that's why I decided to title that chapter the way I did. And so there was a lot more than what happened on the field. There was what happened around the team as well. And I think that anybody who was at the parade, and raise your hand if you were at the parade. Anybody? I know some of you are. There's a million people out there, a lot of you. It's something that no one will ever forget who was there. And that's one thing that was just really neat and told me I've got to write a book to try to put all this in some sort of form that's a little more permanent than my newspaper work. And I knew that it would be something that would be appreciated and would resonate with people. And I've had people tell me I'm going to read this book every spring training, for the rest of my time as a Giants fan and remind myself everything that happened that year. And I've had a lot of other people tell me that they were riding Caltrain and reading it on the way to work, and they had to stop because they were crying and people were looking at them funny. to hear that was just really, really gratifying and really neat. And so it's in some ways what I do is to inform and to entertain. And we live in such an awesome information age, and there's so many more ways that you can connect with people and get information out there. And you guys are such a big part of that. I know I use Google every day as a reporter to help me research and or even if it's something I don't know the definition of a word, or I know if there's a phrase, or I want to make a historical reference or something. It's just so easy to call it up. And you save my back too, because I used to carry around a whole big wheelie bag full of reference materials that I can leave everything at home now. I've got everything on my laptop. So it's what you do every day is inspire people by making it so easy to access information and learn about the players and the team. So that was just a lot of fun to be able to do this project, and I really hope that you enjoy reading it. And thanks for allowing me to be here today, and I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
I really enjoy your work. I read it every day. If I miss it, I have to go back through the archives and read it, because otherwise I feel like I'm out of touch. But what was your most maybe intimidating moment from last year, from your own personal perspective? Because you have to be in August. It was a tough time, and the team was going through some tough moments. I'd be interested to hear some of the stories from your personal perspective about what you felt like. Oh my God, this is not going well, and holy crap, I can't believe that I have to drag my butt in here to ask a question or to report on something really different.
Well, when you're a reporter and you're just dealing with day-to-day deadlines, that's the most intimidating thing. You don't really worry if the team is doing well or not doing well, because you're writing a story regardless. People ask me, were you rooting for the team to win? And basically, I was rooting for no extra innings, no rain delays, no late lead changes, because that makes me use my delete key a whole lot more than I'd like to on deadline. And we're pretty lucky to have Brian Wilson's a pretty good closer. He didn't blow too many saves. When I covered Armando Benitez, I hit the delete key a lot more. So, but that was the baseball gods getting me back for covering Eric Gagne with the Dodgers the year that he didn't blow a save the whole year. So, in terms of my motivations or what was intimidating, it was pretty much, it boils down to practicalities for me on a daily basis, because you've got to get your copy in, you've got to get it in by a certain time. For night games, I basically have to send the second the game ends, or within 2 minutes, basically. And there are a lot of times we don't send in progress stories, so I got to be ready to send it, go downstairs, get some quotes, get some new information, rewrite as much as I can, and then send it again within another 20 minutes. So this last road trip actually was very difficult, because the Giants won or lost in the ninth inning about 4 times. And, all these walk-off wins at home are very exciting, but, they're pretty stressful on the old beat reporters. So obviously the Giants aren't scoring runs in bunches so much. So when they're winning close. And that means that that's probably the most intimidating thing, is having to rewrite really fast.
Okay, I've got a hypothetical for you.
Okay.
Dusty Baker managing instead of Bruce Bochy. Would they still win the World Series?
Wow, it's a great question. I don't know. It's hard to say. One thing that I think was neat about last season is those of us who are around Bruce Bochy every day realize that there's a lot more going on upstairs than comes across in a soundbite. He kind of looks like a big old galoot, when you just see him on TV. But there was a time last year, I don't know if you remember, we were in Dodger Stadium, and Don Mattingly was the interim manager. The Joe Torre and the bench coach, Bob Schieffer, I believe is his name, had gotten ejected. And so Mattingly's the hitting coach, and he's managing the team. He goes out to make a pitching change, and he doubles back to the mound to answer a question and that constituted 2 mound visits, which means the pitcher's got to come out of a game. And Bruce Bochy was out of that dugout in a half a second, arthritic knees and all. And he said, hey, this is the rule. And he quoted the rule, and he was right. And the Dodgers lost that game. They brought in another pitcher who wasn't ready. And I think it was Andres Torres got the hit, and they won. And they obviously needed to win every single game to win the division last year. And that's, I think, when people started realizing in the Bay Area that Bruce Bochy's got a little more going on upstairs than if you listen to his admittedly very, very dull pregame interviews sometimes. And then in the playoffs, obviously, he could do no wrong. He managed very differently. I think he manages a certain way in the regular season because he knows it's a marathon. And sure, Edgar Renteria might be terrible and Aaron Rowan might be terrible, but he knew that it takes all 25 guys to put in a piece at some point to win a game. And sure enough, who would have ever thought Edgar Renteria would be the World Series MVP when he looked doner than done earlier in the year? And, Aaron Rowan had a couple of big plays for them too. And you just don't give up on guys. And so you manage very deliberately and very patiently and with a lot more patience than a lot of fans have. But when he got in the playoffs, he was very, very, he was managing a lot more, with a lot more urgency. And that meant, making moves. And if a guy was struggling, then you took him out. And they used 3/4 of their playoff rotation in Game 6 in Philadelphia, which wasn't even an elimination game, which took some real stones to do. And obviously they won in Philadelphia. He drew a line in the sand and really managed with a lot of guts. So I don't think any other manager wins the World Series. It's hard to say because it is a hypothetical, but I think the Giants had the right guy there, Bruce Bochy.
You mentioned team chemistry and how important it was for this team in particular to win, and that compared with Barry Bonds' era, having someone like that in the clubhouse, being someone who's in the clubhouse. How do you see that changing or staying the same from last year to this year? Obviously losing a Renteria, who was really inspiring, I heard, towards the end of the stretch run. And how is Tejada doing, and what's the climate around that? I know that there's talk about Reyes being available for trades, and I don't know what you know of Jose Reyes as a person or what that clubhouse is like, but what would that do to the intangibles and the chemistry on a team like this?
Well, it's an interesting question because, Bochy's never managed a team that's won the World Series, and most of these guys haven't played on teams that have won the World Series, and even the few that have, like Pat Burrell, he ended up with Tampa the year after he won with Philadelphia, or Rowan ended up with Philadelphia the year after he won it with the White Sox. So a lot of these guys are in a new circumstance, and it's good from the standpoint that they don't panic. If things aren't going right, they realize, hey, we've done it before, we have what it takes within this room to win, but you also have to guard against complacency. Which, so far you look at the way Tim Lincecum has pitched, and he hasn't pitched complacent at all. You look at Aubrey Huff maybe putting on a few pounds, and you wonder, well, has he allowed himself to get a little complacent? So, and he obviously is off to a bad start. So there are some guys, because their personality, it might affect in different ways, and that's probably Bochy's biggest challenge, is to guard against that complacency and stop them from thinking, well, it worked out for us last year, so we'll just skip the work and it'll work out for us again, because that obviously isn't the way it works. In terms of trading for Jose Reyes, it's not realistic because if you trade for someone this point in the year, you have to massively overpay for them. I think the Mets know that a number of teams are going to want a Jose Reyes. They're probably going to give up a number of minor league players. Right now, if the Giants want to get a Jose Reyes, it's going to cost them Zach Wheeler and Brandon Belt, which is their top pitcher and hitting prospect. And that's no way that's going to happen. And if you look at Brian Sabian's resume as a general manager, he'll give up prospects. He will give up players that are regarded in his minor league system, but he'll give them up for players that he can plug in for a few years. And when they traded for A.J. Pierzynski, they thought that A.J. would be one of those guys. He wasn't eligible for free agency for several years. He was arbitration eligible. Well, obviously, he was a gigantic failure his 1 year as a Giant, and they got rid of him. But Jose Reyes would be a Giant basically until the end of the year. And he knows he would make $100 million on the open market. There's no way you're going to sign him to a contract before he would hit free agency. And so for the Giants to get him, if they do, it's going to be right at the trade deadline, which is July 31st. and it's going to have to mean that they don't have a whole lot of competition for him, because I don't see them giving up a lot of their premium prospects. And Bill Newcomb is the new owner, and he's made building from within the farm system such a huge priority. So I don't see that happening. They're going to have to probably muddle through and maybe get a lesser shortstop if there's someone, because there's no question they have a problem at shortstop, and Tejada's probably best suited at third base.
Hi. I was just kind of curious, do you have a sense for how much the front office is using some of these advanced stats like sabermetrics, the UZR, the VORP to kind of analyze and manage their players?
Yeah, I think they are. They're doing it probably a lot less than other organizations, but they do. It is part of the calculus. I think that Brian Sabian trusts his scouts more than anybody, and when he's making the decision at the end of the day, he'll take it into account, but I don't think he allows himself to be swayed if he has a strong opinion already. There are a couple of people in the front office who do a lot of analytics. In fact, they do a lot of their own analytics, and they won't even talk about their methods. Jeremy Shelley is one. Yeshaya Goldfarb is another. So they do delve into that, and it's a part of player evaluation. And Bill Newcomb, being someone who was on the ground floor of Microsoft and understands the value of information, is somebody who is going to continue to champion that and make sure that it's a part of player evaluation and baseball operations. But knowing Brian Sabian the way I do, I think that he's open-minded to it. But if he has a strong opinion, he's going to go with his scouts most times, and his scouts obviously served him very well last year, both in the players that they got and the reports that they had on how best to attack some of the hitters that they faced in the postseason. So, but I've tried to ask them, and they're very secretive about their methods. They don't want to say exactly what they really place a high priority on. But they did tell me that there are some formulas that they've created that are even non-proprietary, that they're things that are just in-house that they do use.
Hi, love your blog. I wanted to ask you, how as a reporter you deal with guys who've sort of fallen out of favor with the club, guys like Fred Lewis and Travis Ishikawa and Kevin Franston. Can you just tell a little bit about your experience with guys like that? Yeah,
I mean, these guys are professionals. I would have a very hard time covering college sports, to be honest, and there's nothing wrong with covering college sports on a beat. Obviously, I love to know about my alma mater, but it's very difficult to cover college sports, I think, because you have to write critically about players, and when they're making millions of dollars, it's a little bit easier to write critically about them because they realize it's part of the bargain. They get to live the lifestyle, and they get the benefits for their family, and if it means that when they go 0 for 4 and strike out with the bases loaded, and I ask them about it, it's not fun to be quizzed on failing in front of 40,000 people, but that's part of the bargain that you sign when you are a major league player. So it's a little bit easier because you get cooperation from the players, the ones that are professionals, the ones that understand my job. As long as you're fair and you don't take a lot of unnecessary cheap shots and you're accurate, then you really have nothing to worry about. But there are days when we get yelled at, and sometimes you realize that has to happen. Because if it doesn't happen, then I'm probably not doing my job the right way. When it comes to players who've fallen out of favor with the organization, you just try to put things in context. And if it's a player who is on the outs and you kind of realize it, well, then you're writing who's going to get playing time and who's not. In the case of a Fred Lewis or a Kevin Franzen, obviously they weren't in the organization's plans. And you just try to put that in context, so you give people the right expectations for who's going to be out there on a given day. And not only do fans want that, but people have fantasy teams too, and they want to know who to draft. So that all goes into it. But whenever you're dealing with a player who's struggling, oftentimes it'll be somebody who's a nice guy. Aaron Rowand is a very nice guy, and he's had his struggles as a Giant, and you have to write about that. And that's just this part of the job, and that's when you just hope that you're as professional as you can be and the players as professional as they can be too. So.
Is Timmy really 5'11", and what's that funky stretch that Brian Wilson does before every pitch?
Let's see. Timmy's 5'11" in spikes. I would say he is a true 5'11". He's about my height, pretty much. If anything, he might just be a tiny bit taller than me. So he's not a little midget. Now, Mike Fontenot is very small. He's about 5'6", I think. And I've only covered one major league player smaller than him, and that was Chad Fonville with the Dodgers back about 12 years ago, he might have been 5'3". He was really small. But, and what was the second part of your question?
Oh, the stretch that Wilson's been doing.
Right. You know what? I think that he has a tight back sometimes, so he's probably just stretching his back muscles a little bit. And obviously he's been a little out of sorts his last couple of appearances, and he's refusing to tell them that he's hurt. So they're kind of wondering right now if maybe his oblique or his back is a little tight, in addition to his ankle that he turned the other day. He's becoming Mr. Mysterio more and more every day. It's hard to get a straight answer out of Brian Wilson. I asked him in spring training if he was happy with where his pitches was going, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, forward." So yes. Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Following up the Brian Wilson question, what's that new pitch that he has? Like, does he have a name? I know he doesn't have a name for it, but what would somebody who knows baseball call that?
Well, he refuses to really label his pitches. Even the pitch that he threw to strike out Ryan Howard and win the NLCS, was it a slider or was it a cutter? And he referred to it as both. And I don't think he wants anybody to know what he's doing. But the pitch that he's throwing that's really sort of diving in on the hands of a lefty, that's sort of a two-seam fastball, I think, and it's just got a lot of run to it. And that's pretty much what it is. And you realize that Dave Righetti, the Giants pitching coach, probably is doing a lot more behind the scenes than people realize, because there are a lot of people who are throwing that pitch, not only in the major leagues but in the minor league organization too. It's one of the reasons the Giants give up so few home runs, not only because they have a big home run or a big home ballpark, but because a lot of guys are keeping the ball down, and that's a big pitch for a lot of guys on the staff.
Can you demonstrate the difference between a cutter and a slider and a four-seam fastball and a two-seam fastball and a slurve and all those other things?
You got a ball? It'd be a little hard without a ball, but basically a four-seam fastball is a straight fastball. It's what you throw with maximum velocity. It's really the first pitch you learn to throw, and you try to learn to control that and work both sides of the plate. And that you throw it across the horseshoe, so you basically have fingers in contact with four seams, which is why it's called a four-seamer. A two-seamer you throw with your fingers on the seams, like almost like a fork ball. You throw them outside the seams. They're right on the seams for a two-seamer, and because of the way the finger pressure, it'll sink. As it gets dragged, it'll sink in the strike zone. So basically, a two-seam fastball is a sinker. And then a slider, you have your two fingers together, and you have them on one seam, and you're basically pushing it off and extending, and that allows it to sort of sweep. And then a curveball, you're throwing like that, and that gets more 12-6, they say, break.
What about a cutter?
And a cutter is basically I think it's just a four-seam fastball, but you have different pressure with your lower fingers or your thumb. I think basically it just has to do with finger pressure more than anything else. And a cutter will kind of have a little snapback, so it won't move completely straight like a four-seamer will. But there are times you want to throw it completely straight. I mean, if Tim Lincecum has two strikes on a guy and he really wants to blow him away and he wants to throw a four-seamer up here, that's a hard pitch to hit. And it's a pitch designed to get a swing and a miss because you're not going to get it called for a strike. So, that all goes into what do you throw? And Buster Posey, as a rookie catcher, had to make all those decisions last year in big games. And he knew the scouting reports inside and out. The guy was, honor roll, presidential honor roll his whole time at Florida State. He knew he was about to be drafted and get a $6 million bonus, and he kept taking writing his papers to get his finance degree anyway. And he was once asked by a reporter from USA Today, he said, other than school and baseball, what do you do? And he said, well, what else is there? So for him, he doesn't have the school anymore, so he just, he's a student of the game. And that's really, I think, knowing those scouting reports and knowing the pitcher's strengths and what to call was such a big part of what they were able to do last year.
Had one question. Do you have any insight to whether or not the Giants are ever going to drop the whole territorial rights stranglehold on San Jose?
Let's see. Bill Newcomb was the chief legal. He headed up the legal department of Microsoft for a long time, about 20 years. He took on the federal government and antitrust legislation. I don't think he's afraid of anybody. And he's going to continue to defend the territorial rights as far as he can go. The reason it's so important to the Giants is because if you look at their stadium signage, if you look at their season ticket base, if you look at all of their minority owners, there's Silicon Valley is incredibly well represented, and they realize the financial and corporate strength here in Silicon Valley. It almost doesn't matter what your market size is anymore. It matters, what you can draw from, what your corporate base is like. And that's why you've got a team like the Arizona Diamondbacks and Phoenix being, a huge metro area, but the average income in Phoenix is the lowest of any major league city, and that's why their ticket prices are so low, and they still can't get anybody to come to the ballpark. So I think the Giants realize that the South Bay is a big part of their revenue stream, a big part of their base of season ticket holders and sponsors, and they don't want to let go of that. They don't want the A's to move there. And if the A's, basically it's a siege mentality. They're trying to starve them out. And if the A's don't want to build in Oakland, I would love to see them build a park in Jack London Square. That'd be great. I lived in Oakland for a few years, and I happen to like Oakland, and I'd like to see the A's stay there. But if that can't happen, the Giants are going to do everything they can to try to keep the A's out of San Jose. And this Blue Ribbon Committee, I have the very fun job of trying to talk to Bud Selig every All-Star game when he does his luncheon with the baseball writers and ask him about the A's and San Jose question. And then I get to see him do his soft shoe tap dance every single time, and he basically says, "Well, the committee's still meeting, so the committee has been meeting for a long, long time." So basically, though, if Bud says that it's something that they're going to let the A's pursue, it takes a 3/4 vote of the owners to overturn the territorial rights, and Bud has made so much money for the owners that I really do believe that if he says, this is a position I'm advocating, then the owners will follow suit. So basically, they just need to convince Bud Selig that it would be bad for both teams in the Bay Area to have the A's in the South Bay, and the jury's still out.
We'll take one more, and then you're going to do some book signing, right?
Yeah.
My question is, what would you say thus far as the sort of differences, if any, in the clubhouse camaraderie / like expectations? This season, 45 games in, I think there's been something like 11 walk-off wins. How does the mentality compare to last year when there were no expectations? This year we're defending the World Series.
Yeah, it's a good question. Right now they're 14-3 in one-run games and 11-0 at home. And on pace to break the major league record for walk-off wins. So again, not so great for the journalist on deadline, but I mean, just tremendously exciting games. And I think if anything, we're talking about that complacency earlier and how do you ward it off. And the fact that they get a sellout crowd there on a midweek Tuesday game in May against the Diamondbacks, who's not a premium opponent, when it's a school night and they're selling the place out and the people are going nuts. I got to think that that's going to carry these guys along, and it's going to be a big factor. I don't see a whole lot of differences from last year. It's such a similar team. They're obviously winning in a similar style, even with fewer runs than they scored last year. So I think they realize that to a degree it's a little unsustainable to go 14-3 in one-run games, and the bullpen can't pitch as well as it's pitched all year. The starters are going to have days where their arms are dragging, and they're going to have to score more runs, and I think they realize this. And whether it means that they just they'll bring up Brandon Belt at some point to help the offense, or they'll make another trade or adjustment, you have to constantly be looking for ways to get better, and that's certainly what they did last year in overhauling their roster during the year. So they do realize that they've got to go out there and produce, and if they don't, then somebody else is probably going to get their at-bats. So they're still finding their identity as an offensive team, but certainly, they're pitching as well as they ever have. And I think we just all saw that pitching wins championships. So you'd have to like their position right now because they're in first place by, 3.5, 4 games? And that there's a lot that they're not doing right. So, who knows? Maybe we'll have a sequel. So thank you, everyone, for coming out. Appreciate it.